So Deadpool and Wolverine's out. Great movie. Went out and saw it opening night. Had a fantastic fucking time. Laughed my ass off. I would probably give that, like, at worst, 8.5, 9 out of 10. Like, fantastic movie. Enjoyed every little bit of it. If you were a fan of the old Fox, Marvel movies, you'll get everything you want out of that. If you were just a fan of, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, wanted one last hurrah, you got that. You love Deadpool movies in general, you're gonna love it. It's just one of those movies that no matter how many times you can come out with something like that, it's going to be fun no matter what. I wish, however, that people would share that opinion. No, I'm not talking audience score, because we actually know that the audience is more often than not the actual representation of real people that go to watch movies. The overall feelings on it are not great. It's a 56 on Metacritic, and you're thinking, okay, well, a lot of these movies too tend to get low ratings because of the way critics are. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I want to just prove just how horrendous these reviews are being for this movie right now. So they did the top 15 best Hugh Jackman movies. Let's see what ended up being above it. We'll see about stuff that doesn't matter. So already, I like The Last Stand. It is not remotely as good. Now, again, we're talking about how maybe different reviews were back then, but still, the fact that Metacritic is openly going, hey, look at what movie is better than Deadpool and Wolverine is a little insulting. And only gets worse when you think it's not even apparently the best Wolverine movie. Whereas, it's not great. If you go further than that, I mean, there are movies that, okay, yeah, I'm surprised actually, honestly, like Mr. Rob is only at 63. You'd think it'd be more than that. Original X-Men, okay, I can understand that. That makes sense. Prestige is a really good movie. X-Men 2, also really good. So, like, there's a sense that you can understand that there are things that, do deserve high praise. Like, again, Logan, not a shock that that would be higher. But, like, if I was being real here, Deadpool and Wolverine would be probably somewhere around here. Like, it should be, in my opinion, in the 70s minimum on Metacritic. But we have to understand that, well, critical reviews aren't any different. Now, out of curiosity, because I haven't looked at the Ryan Reynolds one, what do they actually put above that, too? And see if there's anything that, can really get under my skin. Because, I mean, we're looking for anything that's beating a 56. And so far, apparently, well, I guess, Ryan Reynolds, at least he makes his list. This also tells me that reviewers must really not like him. And Free Guy was really good. I love that movie. Yeah, Deadpool, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And Deadpool 2 is a 66. Okay. And then I don't even care. The Proposal not being on here is insulting. The Proposal is a great movie. I don't care what anybody says. But anyways, I don't need to be on here anymore. I honestly am not usually bothered by critical response. And I think this is just the one that kind of like is the straw that broke the camel's back and got me to want to talk about this again. Because at the end of the day, like, I generally don't take too much stock into what I see in critical reviews anymore. It's more like I'll watch YouTubers, especially with game reviews. I really don't trust anything I see with like an IGN or GameSpot or, like any other like main site that you see a lot of reviews on. I generally will look at what like the reaction from either YouTubers, Twitch streamers, or even just general feelings from people online. So, like, an audience score is going to mean a lot more to me than a critic score, even though, granted, in some of these games or some of these pictures, or like whatever it may be, some of them times there's review bombing and you got to deal with that bullshit. But there's always ways to get a better gauge on things. Whereas I feel like at this point, critical reviews just do not do it anymore unless you are a very specific type. And that is, I want to say, 0.0001% of the population that would actually associate with most of these people. And by that, I mean other critic reviewers. So it's at a point that, like, I honestly don't feel like there is any stock to be taken anymore in critic reviews, because I don't feel like critics are reviewing the content they're reviewing with an open mind or with any sort of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is right now, but like just any sort of honesty and like actual like openness to look at something without their own pre-biases. Because like I've seen an argument on, you know, how a lot of reviewers, so you got to understand, like, let's just take movies, for example, in this case. You got to understand, like, they watch a lot of movies, you know, they've seen all this stuff before. So, you know, they're going to say, oh, well, it's nothing I haven't seen before. I don't care, because that's not your job as a critic. Your job as a critic is not to go, this is unlike anything you've ever seen before. Your job is to tell me if it's good or not. So if you, a reviewer, a critic, have seen a Deadpool kind of movie 1,000 times in a bunch of different variants, your job is to tell me how it stacks up against other movies like this. Not to go, oh, it's nothing you haven't seen before. Oh, it just treads the same story, the same plot lines as all the other ones. I don't fucking care about that. I'm watching Deadpool Wolverine because I want more of the Deadpool style. I want more of that. So tell me how it stacks up against the other ones. Tell me how it stacks up against other comedy action movies. Tell me how it stacks up against other R-rated action movies. Instead of telling me, oh, it doesn't do anything different. It's the same Marvel formula, which, by the way, I've got to say to people, and this goes to beyond just critics, this goes to you, the viewer, if you are, and I quote, burnt out on Marvel movies. I have to remind you guys, because I see this every single time a new Marvel movie comes out, people say, oh, it's just the same stuff every time. You do know that you don't have to watch these anymore if you're burnt out, right? You as a human being can make the decision that, hey, I don't think these are for me anymore, or I'm just kind of like done with these. I think I should take a break. And what happens is, well, let's be real, y'all get FOMO, and you think that, oh, I'm going to miss the one cameo that I've been dying to see for the last 20 years, and you have to watch it because you're afraid that you're going to miss something. And the reality is no, you're not. Because if you don't care anymore, there's nothing they can do that's going to make you suddenly come back. Because I see so many complaints right now, even with my own friend group, where they'll say like, oh, like I can't associate with this formula anymore. And I go, okay, then stop. Because I've done that with open world games for the most part. There are a lot of stuff now with gaming that whenever I see, like live service or massive online games, like for the most part now, I look at those and immediately go, no, because I can't do these anymore because I've overdone them over the years of time that I've gamed, and I need to stop because I know I'm not going to like it, or even if I try, I'm just going to end up wasting time that I could be using playing something else. And I see this all the fucking time with people where it's, oh my God, Marvel movies, they're the same every time, and it just isn't doing anything different. To which I go, then why do you keep engaging in it? I can get past this because I still enjoy it for what it is. I know that it's going to be the same shit every time, but here's the thing. I actually like that formula, and it's a fun movie to sit down and watch. I'm not going to these movies to go, because again, another thing with the critic reviews is they're like, oh, well, the story, there really isn't honestly that much to it. To which I go, what? Why did you think this movie was going to have that? This movie was clearly going to be, hey, here's basically a bunch of fan service for the last how many ever years since the original X-Men movie that Fox was doing all of these Marvel movies. You're going to get a bunch of cameos. You're going to get a bunch of silly jokes. You're going to get a bunch of violence. And that's it. If there happens to be a like moderately okay story, that's a big plus. Like, this is the part with reviews that I don't understand. If you're, because apparently these people like to act like they're the smartest people in the room whenever a movie's on. You think you'd understand that you know what you're walking into and review it accordingly, but instead they have to pair it up against the best things they've ever seen and go, well, this isn't X or this isn't Y, like this isn't the stuff that I think is the greatest. That's not your fucking job. Your job as a critic is to tell us if it's worth watching, not if it's the best, not if it is treading new ground, not if it's doing all these other things. At the core of everything, your job is to tell me if I should watch it or not. And when a lot of these critics spend a lot of time basically being a snob about it and saying, well, it's not this and it doesn't do this well and it honestly is just not doing anything different, it drives me crazy. You can tell that it's driving me crazy because I keep going back to the same thing of where they say, well, it's not doing anything different. Motherfucker, there are people that have never watched these kind of movies before. To them, it's new. It's the same thing when, like, As I say, I get why open world games, because again, I go back to that. I'm not into these really that much anymore. But to somebody who is just coming out into their own and is like a young, like 14, 15, 16 years old, who and now is able to start like having some sort of, if they have a part-time job or they're getting an allowance, they have enough money to go start buying their own games. And they look at these kind of things and go, wow, like this is something I really haven't gotten to play before. Yeah, it's fresh to them. It's always going to be fresh to somebody else. So stop acting when you critique these things that, oh, well, it's nothing new. But to some people that are going to read your review, it is. So when you say it's nothing different to them, you're basically telling to these people that, oh, if you've never seen anything like this before, it's still not worth your time. Really? Like, explain that one. What about Deadpool and Wolverine? Not doing anything different means that someone who's never really watched a Marvel movie before or watched a Deadpool movie before would not enjoy. Like, that kind of shit drives me nuts. And, it really gets to the point that I think, honestly, like, we as a collective should probably just adopt a new formula for how we review things. I don't think at this point anymore that a score is enough. Because the problem is that score always comes with a bunch of caveats. Now, granted, and it's what I generally do, is I look at people who I actually can trust based on what they say, and I work with that. But, like, as an aggregate, I don't think saying Deadpool and Wolverine is a 56 overall means anything, because for starters, it's wrong. And I don't even feel like that is bias for me to say this. The fact that they're saying that movie is not even a 6 out of 10 is insulting, because that is probably one of the most fun movies I've seen the last, probably since the pandemic, right? So it's really annoying when I see stuff like that. Like, even when, because I have friends that swear by certain people. And of course, when IGN posts up a 7 for this movie, I don't believe that rating. And it's just a general vibe check. Because I understand, unlike a lot of critics, apparently, that there is a difference between a good movie and a fun movie. And that's all I wanted out of Deadpool and Wolverine. I don't care. Like, it was the same with the Marvels. Like, another example of a movie that people really didn't care for because they're like, oh, well, the story is nothing. I didn't go into that movie thinking I was going to see some overarching story that was going to mean a lot to the MCU timeline. I thought, okay, this is going to be a fun girl power movie where it's just going to be a bunch of silliness, a bunch of like jokes, a bunch of fun little space sequences, and I got more of that than I expected. I honestly came out of that movie much happier than I thought I was going to be. I thought this could be a solid 7 or 8, and I came out of this being I fucking love this movie. This is great. This is a great time. And with Deadpool and Wolverine, I went into this movie going, I am going to laugh my ass off, and as long as that's what I do, this is a fantastic fucking movie in my eyes. And sure enough, that's exactly what it was. So when I think about how I would going forward want to review stuff like this, I'd almost want to give 2 separate scores. One being, hey, here, if I actually take this movie apart and go through some of the things that I think they could have done better and say oh, well, this was a problem or this was slow or maybe this could have been done with a little more, give that a little bit more time, that could be a score and that would make sense. But what I'd also want to do is also just straight up give you a number and be like, hey, here's how fucking fun this is. Here's how much I enjoyed it, though. Because there's a difference to me between how much I enjoy something and how much I can tear it apart and how much I actually objectively can find something high quality. Because, for example, still to this day, and on the Pixel Play Podcast YouTube channel, which you should go to because that is where most of my stuff gets done these days, I did a recent top 10 Final Fantasy games list, and number 3 was Final Fantasy X, and number 1 was Final Fantasy VI. And that doesn't necessarily mean that 6 is my favorite. 10 is still my favorite, but I also recognize that 6 is a better game, which is why I put that number 1 and put 10 number 3. Because 10 has a lot of more nostalgic value of things that, because I was 15 when I played that game. So it was the core of my building years as a teenager. And that's the one I remember. Whereas 6 is something I played out of a rental store when I was 9 or 10, and I honestly didn't connect to it the same way. I've gone back and played it since, and the feelings are different now. But I can still look at 10 and go, that's where my favoritism comes in. And 6 is the one where I go, there is very, very few things that I can pick apart about that game. It is basically as close to perfect as you can get. And that's why, honestly, if I was to put Deadpool and Wolverine and say, hey, here's what I think it is in terms of a critical review score, and then a thing of just an overall, if you just sit down as a regular human being, as a fan, and just say, here's how fucking fun it was. So, the fun rating, it was a fucking 10. I cannot recommend this enough if you just want to sit down and feel really fucking happy by the end of the movie. That's all you're going to get out of this. if I actually sat down and put a score to what I think it actually is as a critical piece of media, I think at best I could give it a 7. And I think that might even be generous, because like if I'm actually being critical here, and here's where the difference is going to come in, there is a lot of time that is treaded on just the fact that, you know, Deadpool and Wolverine hate each other and fight a lot. And some of those fight scenes can take a little longer than I think I'd like them to. I think that the main villain that they decide to do, they could have fleshed out more. There are a few cameos that I don't think last as long as you would like to. And then on top of that, like because here's the thing too, because I'm not spoiling anything in the movie, but if you have never watched Deadpool 1 and 2, you really don't need to, because any referencing to the first two movies is basically amounts to like 5 to 10% of the movie at most. And the rest of it is, it's all like unique story that they've built with Deadpool and Wolverine, where it's its own separate entity. Whereas like the stuff from 1 and 2 is basically just to kind of nod and be like, hey, here's Deadpool and his friends. And then we go into the actual stuff. So like, I think if I was being honest, like as a critical, like piece of media, it's maybe like I'd probably put like a 6.5 to a 7. Like it's still like very well put together, and I think a lot of the action sequences are really good. I think the choices that they made in cameos were actually pretty spot on. I would have liked to see like 1 or 2 more, especially towards the end. I thought there was going to be just 1 more towards the end, but it doesn't really come. Whereas like they basically, you know, I guess because the Deadpool movie makes sense to say this, they basically blow their load in the first half, and then you're kind of left to the rest of it. But like there's a lot of good stuff in there that I think even as from a critical eye, it's good. Like I don't see the 56 from an aggregate point of view. I still don't see that. The fact that there's not even a green box to the score on Metacritic for this movie is very insulting to me. But like, again, that's a critical score. And unfortunately, like I guess that's where the audience score comes in. If I'm just going to click on the thing there to see, and right now it's sitting at an 8.2 for user score. So actually, I want to see, like, out of curiosity, what is the comparison with the other two? Because that's where I really want to see how that changes audience-wise. Okay, so so far they think Wolverine is better, and okay, so you know what? That honestly checks out. That people think that Deadpool and Wolverine is actually the best one from an audience perspective. That may still change by the time that this is all said and done, but honestly, I kind of agree with that. Whereas, you know, the other two movies I think like are actually better put together movies, but like in the same way that if somebody ever asked me what's my favorite Marvel movie of all time right now, it's Endgame, and it's not even close. But that's not fair, because Endgame is literally just, hey, we're just going to jack you off for 2 hours and change, and you're going to love it. And I did, because that's what Endgame was. So it's kind of unfair to look at it that way. Whereas in this case, you know, it's a similar thing. Like, it's mostly jacking you off, and it's Deadpool that would do it with a fucking smile on his face. But that's what this movie was. It was just pure fun. And when I see a lot of review scores that are looking at it as like, well, it wasn't a very good movie as, you know, an actual picture, that's clearly not what this movie was. And the fact that a critic is trying to review it as such tells me that critics don't actually know what they're doing sometimes. Because if I walked into this movie, I would rate it differently than how I would rate, I don't know, like a fucking Oscar picture. You know, like if I watch something like, say, a Parasite, which my God, that movie is a fucking masterpiece. And I say that as someone who really doesn't like a lot of Best Picture winners. That's a great movie. And I can give you a list of reasons from a critical standpoint why that's a good movie. Do I think it's a fun movie? That would be a different story. Do I think it's an enjoyable movie? That's a different story. And that's the difference here, is I would walk into a movie like Parasite different than I would walk into a movie like Deadpool and Wolverine. So, I mean, again, like I said at the top, this proves why I really don't look at critics as being a good judgment anymore of this, because I feel like a lot of critics are going off of what they think a good movie is supposed to be rather than what the people that is reading what they're writing would think a good movie is. And that's not to say that these critics are wrong per se, but I think that for a much larger majority of people, that their opinions are basically null and void. And unfortunately, I also do think that there are a lot of reviewers these days that are saying certain things because they know it's going to generate clicks more than it's going to generate interest. And that is unfortunate, because I don't believe for a second that a critic should be there to generate clicks, because the idea is to actually get people to watch something, not to read your article. But unfortunately, we live in an era where, that's how it works now. And it's kind of unfortunate that that happens, because it means that things like this fall through the cracks. But what do you guys think? Honestly, like, I don't know if anybody who's watching this has seen the movie yet, or, if you've read any reviews of it, or even just reviews in general. Like, how do you feel with how, whether it's movies, whether it's games, whether it's TV shows, whether it's like anything that, gets reviewed these days, how do you think about the way that critics are handling things these days? Do you think that there is, a disconnect from a lot? Do you think that there's, like in terms of a written review versus like what we see on YouTube now, or like how we take, people on podcasts, how they review things? Like, what are your overall thoughts with the way that critical reviews are done these days? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So let me know. Obviously, like the channel, subscribe, or like the video, subscribe to the channel. It's been a long time, man. I haven't been doing this for a while. I'm used to a podcast where I have like the script that I've said 1,000 times now. This is different. Bear with me here. So like the video, subscribe to the channel. And like I said, go check out the Pixel Play podcast if you want to see more content with me and my friends Kaylin and Chris, where we go into more of the gaming sphere, and, check all our stuff out there. But that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for checking out this, and I will see you on the next rant. Take care. Bye-bye for now.